Hello and welcome to the social journey, using social media to enhance your career. My name is Carla Laroche and I am a law fellow at the Southern Poverty Law Center. This talk is sponsored by the ABA section of Civil Rights and Social Justice, the Criminal Justice section, and the Young Lawyers Division. This topic today, it's a two-part series. This topic today will be on finding a topic, women as weapons of war, and TED Talks. On June 22nd, we will hold the second part of our two-part series entitled The Side Hustle, Making Social Media Work Outside of Work with Sara Elizabeth Dill and Paula Edgar. Our two panelists today will be Sara Elizabeth Dill and Katrina Castillo. Sara Elizabeth Dill is the Director of Criminal Justice Standards and Policy for the American Bar Association in Washington, D.C. In this role, she is responsible for overseeing the development and revision of the standards for domestic and international criminal justice systems, formulating policy, legislative advocacy, and filing amicus briefs with the United States Supreme Court. Prior to this, Sara Elizabeth was a founding partner in the Chicago, London, and Miami offices of the law offices of Sara Elizabeth Dill. Her practice focused on criminal defense, international law, human rights, and immigration. She represented individuals and corporations in state and federal trial and appellate courts, international tribunals, and before government agencies. Sara has published numerous articles in recent years on international law, criminal defense, immigration, human trafficking, and free speech. In addition to publishing, Sara has spoken at international and national legal conferences and educational seminars. Sara has an LLM in international human rights with the highest honors from Northwestern Law School. Prior to that, Sara attended Marquette University, where she majored in political science with an emphasis in economics, criminology, and international affairs. She then continued her legal education at Marquette Law School. Katrina Castillo is a senior juvenile dependency attorney for the state of Florida in West Palm Beach. Katrina obtained her JD from Valparaiso University School of Law in 2013 and an LLM in Law, Politics, and Legislation from American University, Washington College of Law in 2014. Katrina is extremely active in the ABA Young Lawyers Division and currently serves as the online and social media chair, which is relevant to today's discussion. So now that you know who we're going to be speaking to, let's get started on what we'll be discussing. Sara, most of the questions will be to you. So let's start off with, and thank you for being here.
Of course, thank you for having me. Appreciate it. Always a pleasure to work with you.
Our main focus is the amazing TEDx talk that you presented on women as weapons of war. What motivated you to do a TEDx talk?
Well, I mean, the opportunity, obviously, to get on the big stage, I don't think that's something that anyone would turn down. But as we've seen in recent years, TED Talks are really a way that we can get important messages out, and not just to those in the audience, but those who watch them online, share them. And so the thought was to have the ability to get on stage and really address some important topics and get the word out. That, for me, was just key, because I think one of the things we've seen over the years is that with social media, that's one of the best venues that we can have to promote good causes and raise awareness.
Great. And what were you seeking to get out of the talk itself, besides the awareness? What were you seeking to get out?
To finish it. But, it's really, I mean, part of it was my own development in having to speak in a manner that was completely different from litigation, where you're on your feet, you're reacting to things, you don't have prepared remarks, to giving a prepared speech almost verbatim on the stage, but also to be able to connect with people around the world. And the conference that we did in Monte Carlo was exceptional because the focus was really on evolution, revolution, and important issues facing the world, such as human rights, immigration, the refugee crisis, mental health, and the environment. And so being able to connect with people from different, I guess, walks of life other than the legal profession was also a great benefit from that conference and doing the talk.
Okay. So the talk, because of technical difficulties or capabilities of GoToWebinar, we will be presenting the audio, and the audience had received the link to the actual video. But we will start with your introduction, your bold and powerful introduction, and then start talking from there.
4 stories. A woman escapes conflict and finds refuge where she can mourn the violent deaths of her husband and children. But then she becomes a victim of sexual assault at the hands of those who are supposed to protect her. With no means to escape, she suffers in silence. A teenage girl kidnapped and sold to a man to be his wife and slave. Raped daily, she is forced to bear his children to build the next generation of terrorists. A little girl raped for over 7 years in her own home by her brother. Her parents refuse to punish him or to protect her. When she goes public with what happened, she is called a liar, a disgrace to the family. She's cast out into the world, and she is alone. A happy young bride soon discovers the harsh and deviant nature of her husband. She leaves him and goes to the police. Her family threatens to kill her if she ever returns to her homeland.
That is how you start off. That is your introduction to the audience's introduction into a very, very powerful talk. You start off with 4 stories. You said that you wanted to do this for your own professional development. So why this topic? There are probably other ones for social justice issues, as you listed, that you could have done. So why this topic?
So, in deciding what I was going to speak about, I thought, as I watched other TED Talks, I watched ones that were done recently, there hadn't been a lot done on violence against women. And my thought was, given my unique perspective, both from my own personal story and having that connection, as well as being able to talk about clients I'd represented, the thought was that it would be a better presentation to the audience. It would be a more personal story. And it would also be something that, I joked when I was at the conference that, everyone said, oh, we're so looking forward to your talk. And I said, it's going to be the most depressing part of the day because of the topic. And so, it really, and as the talk goes on, for those who've watched it on video who will, about a minute or so after this part, I go in depth about a particular story of a woman that really highlights just the extent of the problem, how these horrible situations happen, as well as the statistics around the world, because a lot of people don't realize that this is something happening in our backyards. And so just the sheer nature of everything that was going on in the world at the time, this talk was given very shortly after the election in the United States, and all of the rhetoric against women that was coming out around that. And so I thought it was just a very pertinent topic, given the time frame, given what's going on in the world. There have been a number of cases in the U.S. That the thought was there was very light sentences given for men who were assaulting women. And it felt right as the talk developed over the time. It just seemed more and more, and the reaction I got from people was, yes, this is a very important topic that needs to be addressed, and it needs to be addressed head on.
Okay. So you mentioned different stories people you talked to, and that the TED Talk was about social justice. Give us more information about the process. How did you apply?
So my giving the talk was a little bit different. I had been in touch with some personnel who were planning a TEDx conference in London focused around women. And we discussed at the time my talking about, human trafficking, violence against women, just given the work that I'd done. And we ended up at that point transferring over and looking at the conference that we were going to be doing in Monte Carlo. And the organizers of the TEDx in Monte Carlo. Nazanin Mateen is one of the heads of that, and she's been very dedicated to these issues. And she was very interested in the topic, my background, and so from there, you go through kind of an application audition process where they review your background, and then you have to do, I think it was about a 2 or 3 minute kind of just recorded on your iPhone video at very beginning about some of the things you were thinking about speaking about. Then the internal workings from there I'm not positive about, but they basically review it, and then they come up with, kind of, they want a broad range of speakers. Obviously, it's an international conference, so they wanted to have people from a number of different countries. And I believe I was the only American who was speaking at the conference in Monte Carlo. And they want a broad range of subjects as well in presentations. And if actually you go and watch some of the other talks from Monte Carlo, you'll see there were musicians, fashion designers, just a number of different people in background speaking. But what's interesting is that we did not know, and we hadn't seen anyone's talks until really the day before the conference. And so that was kind of another benefit that you saw as talks developed in different ways of speaking. But that was the start of it. And then once you're on board, then you get to spend 4 or 6 months preparing for it.
Right. You said you had submitted the video. How long between when you sent that short video and when you knew for sure that you would be talking? Because you said you didn't really know the interworks, but like how long did it take?
I mean, this is going back a year ago or so. It wasn't, I would say at most it was a month between that process. Might have been shorter. But I think from the time that I knew I was talking until I actually took the stage in Monte Carlo, you have, I think it was about 6 months.
Okay. Okay, and so now you're in the process. You're getting ready to prepare this talk. What support did you receive from TEDx itself?
So they provide you with a coach who kind of walks you through, helps you write your talk, works with you on public speaking, things like that, guides you as to some of like the guidelines that you have to follow, because obviously, they want to make sure that no one's going to say anything offensive or inappropriate, as well as just kind of framing for a lot of us, if we're not used to speaking in the TED manner, helping us. How do you draft something like this? 13 to 14 minutes is much shorter than anything you expect when you're writing. I think my first full draft was probably around 21 minutes of a talk. And so, and that's what they help with, cutting things out, organizing, structure, things like that. And then from there, you have sessions via Skype with your coaches. I also reached out to basically a speechwriter, speech coach, wonderful person who had been one of my mentors at Northwestern, and to get his help, because this is what his skill was. And so TED gave a ton of support, but then also kind of reaching out to get that in-depth, in-person training and practical advice. When you're standing with someone in a room practicing your talk, you get much more feedback than trying to practice something over Skype.
Yeah. All right. So you mentioned the Northwestern mentor. Who else did you seek guidance from and advice? Did you make friends just sit there and listen to you and give you feedback? What did you do?
So my poor dog probably heard my talk about 50 times. Part of the kind of problem with TED Talks is that you're supposed to keep this under very close wraps. And so there were limits as to when I could even announce that I was doing it. There were limits on how much I could disclose about what I was talking about or the content. You're not even supposed to talk about the content of it with people until much before. And so I really couldn't do a lot. It's not like if you're going to argue before the Supreme Court where you have all of these moots and people hear your arguments and everything. And so I was a bit limited. I was fortunate. One of my colleagues here at the ABA, Elizabeth Anderson, reviewed a draft of my talk to get her feedback, which was amazing. She heads our Rowley division, and so it was great to have her input. But other than that, it was mostly just my TED coach, my mentor from Northwestern, and then just practicing it again and again with, in front of my dog basically, or recording and sending it over. But it really, that I think was the hardest part, was not being able to get widespread feedback before taking the stage. But I understand the reasons why, because they do want that kind of shock value when you are up there.
And you mentioned that it's not like litigation, but do you feel like your litigation skills helped you with preparing for this?
Uh, I think they were a help and a hindrance.
Hmm.
The help factor is, being, once you've tried enough cases and argued at the appellate level, you don't have kind of the fear of public speaking. And so from that perspective, the litigation definitely helped because there were no nerves when I took the stage. And I was used to talking in front of people. Granted, when you're speaking to a room of 500 people, it's a little bit different than when you're speaking to 12 jurors, but that definitely helped. I think the hard transition, as I said, is, when you're litigating, you outline your opening statement, you outline your closing argument. If you're doing appellate work, you can outline and prepare as much as you want, but it gets thrown out the window within the first 30 seconds, especially if you're in the Seventh Circuit. And so from those perspectives, I think it really makes you adjust. But I think it's important, and I think for any lawyer, whether they're litigating or doing any type of public speaking or presentations to clients or negotiations, I think having both of those skills is important. And I think we get too pigeonholed on one aspect and forget about the other.
Yeah. All right. So we've been talking about your preparation. Let's hear a clip about how obviously prepared you were with the numbers.
We have to all understand the nature and depth of the problem. Rwanda, 250,000 women raped in a 3-month time period during the 1994 genocide. Democratic Republic of Congo, in 2011, 48 women were raped every hour. That's almost 1 per minute. America, every 2 minutes, a person is sexually assaulted. England, 85,000 women are raped every year, but only 15% reported to the police. France, every 40 minutes, a rape is reported. That is horrific enough on its own. Even worse, 9 out of 10 rapes in France are not reported at all.
We heard earlier the 4 stories, like the personal stories and also stories of particular women. And now you gave data, the actual numbers regarding women as weapons of war. How did you approach the numbers versus stories and just the overall TED Talk?
So I wanted to have kind of a dual aspect, and there was the original version, the complete version, went more into depth. I had more statistics. I wanted to have the most up-to-date statistics I could, even to the point where I think 2 weeks before I gave my TED Talk, I was updating some of the numbers. I thought the personal stories, the individual stories were important because in a way they put a face to what was happening. But I thought the statistics were telling because it really shows the nature of the problem and the extent of the problem. And I felt that was important because especially when I talked about England, the United States, and France, obviously being in Monaco for the talk, it really brought it home where you would be able to tell people, look, this is a problem in your country. This isn't just a problem in Africa, in Southeast Asia, or in the nations where we hear about this a lot. Like, this is a problem that you have to face within your own countries. And so there was a lot of research that went into it. Obviously some of the stories I told were from individuals that I'd worked with directly. Others were ones that I'd researched and had either through working with NGOs that I had to, really try to tell the most compelling stories, but also the widest spectrum so that people could see, everything from the human trafficking victim to the refugee to the situation with Boko Haram.
Okay. All right, so let's go to the clip where you conclude. We've talked about preparation. We've talked about some of the stories and data that you included in the talk, though there was many stories and much more data in the story that we just can't give during this webinar. So let's talk about the conclusion.
You can help the girls of today become the guardians of tomorrow. In their name, and in the name of all girls who live in danger, it is time to tell the world women are not weapons of war. It is time to disarm.
I call that part the like call to action, time to disarm, because it's such a call to action. Like we can do this together. At the conclusion, what did you and or the audience think at that moment?
So it was an odd experience because, you know, I was the closing talk for the morning session of the conference. And so there were, I think, 4 or 5 talks that had gone before me. And some of them were very lighthearted, very interesting. One of them I think was actually funny. One involved music. And so it was a very kind of uplifting start to the day. And then I take the stage. And, you know, and I'd known from the day before during kind of our dress rehearsal, you know, when I finished, my fellow TED Talk individuals were in tears, they were very emotional, and I'm going, how am I going to take the stage tomorrow with the whole room full of people if this is the reaction? And in fact it was. I mean, the room was completely silent the entire time of my talk. You could have heard a pin drop in that room. Other people who were in the audience, friends of mine who were there, who traveled for it, you know, said that people were crying, that they saw that there were women who, like, the person next to them was comforting them. And the rule for TED Talks is that when you finish, you say thank you and you exit the stage right away so that the next person can come up. And the MC of the event, who you don't get to see her, which is unfortunate because she's just this wonderful woman who was introducing and doing the follow-up after each talk, you know, was waiting there for me with a giant hug because she knew it was an emotional topic. And one of the other speakers who knew it was emotional was waiting as well to kind of give me a big hug. And as the woman gives me a hug, she said, turn around. And we're just off the wing, so just off the stage. And I turned and the entire audience was on their feet clapping. And as soon as I saw that, I just burst into tears and like rushed off into the wings as fast as I could because there had been no preparation of do I go back out there? Like there was no prep. But it really, for me, that was powerful because it really showed that I reached the audience and that I struck a chord with them and that they recognized how important this was. And the best part about this was that following my talk, the organizers were trying to decide what do we do because there was a break in between the morning and afternoon session, and it was supposed to be just kind of like a networking time for the attendees to meet some of the people who were speaking and giving their TED Talks, to mingle, to meet other people, network, everything. And the thought was that we cannot just send everyone out to be social and happy and mingle directly after I finished talking. And they'd arranged for this young girl who was about, I think, 8 or 9 years old at the time, you know, world champion gymnast and dancer to perform. And so while it's still dark and everyone's sitting in the auditorium after my talk, having given this call to action, the name of young girls and young women everywhere, then you have this young, beautiful girl take the stage to perform a gymnastics and dance routine, which kind of put a visual to people like, okay, this is the girl that we need to protect. And then to see the beauty of her performance, give people a few minutes to disconnect, and then be able to go out and once they've kind of recovered and composed themselves. So it was very powerful, but I thought that's kind of the beauty of the TED Talks and these conferences is that you are able to reach, you know, 500 people in a matter of 13 minutes.
Great. And you may have already said this, but what were you proudest about your talk?
I think the reaction, that it was such a positive reaction to it, that there were people coming up to me saying, what can I do about this? How can I help? Are there organizations that we need to develop, or foundations, or are there places I should donate to? And that, to me, the fact that you're able to not just reach people and affect them, but then also motivate them to actually do something, I think that's the most powerful thing that you can do with words.
If you could do it again, what would you change or wish you had known before you started?
I don't know. I mean, that talk, I think I would have left the same. You know, I've thought from time to time, should I have lightened it up a bit? Should I have cracked a joke somewhere? But it really, the topic didn't lend itself to something like that. obviously, as I've been asked to do future talks, it's kind of, well, do I do another very dark and depressing topic? Do I find something lighter? And my thought for the future is if I do another one, what I would probably do, and I did this a little bit at the end of my talk when I talked about Hadia, the Syrian refugee that I'd worked with, was that I'd focus like kind of a follow-up on what happens to these women afterwards and the lives that they lead and kind of the positive effects and how that comes about. And so just so it's not going to be one that leaves everyone in the room in tears at the end.
But standing ovation, so you got one of the two. And going back to one of my first questions, did you get out of it what you had hoped?
I did. It was a wonderful experience. Professional development-wise, to go through that, to gain those skills, and also just to connect with people around the world on it. There's been so much positive feedback since then. There have been, I think the most telling part was that as I was at the reception that evening, I had men coming up to me saying, my wife or my girlfriend has been through something, but she hasn't opened up. How do I go about being there for her and helping her with this? But then I had women who came up to me and would kind of find me in a corner off to the side, and they would say, I've never told anyone, but I've been through this, or I had something happen to me, or I was a victim of sexual assault. And the fact that they felt open enough and safe enough, even in this environment, at a TED conference, to open up about it. I had people emailing me afterwards saying, I saw your talk, and what should I do? And so obviously getting them the resources they need, offering to be there for them, giving them the support and encouragement. That for me was, I think, an even more powerful part, that if even a few women who were survivors saw that and got the courage they needed to get, whether it's mental health or going, any medical, or just dealing with the trauma that they endured and having the strength to come forward themselves, even privately to professionals or family members, I think that was a very powerful aspect. And so I hope that, as people continue to watch the talk and women find it, that it might give them the courage. Obviously, my hope is that someday we don't have the level of women that are survivors, but also that men will see this and realize that what they're doing is wrong, and having calls to action to put a stop to this through societal change.
So the TED Talk is available on YouTube for everyone to see, but what next for you? You mentioned potential topics for future presentations. How are you advancing this side hustle?
So, there's a lot of things. I think anytime you have a platform like this, you can then use it to write articles, to call for policy development. It's very powerful, I think, rather than sending someone a 10-page article, to say, hey, watch part of this video, and this is why you need to act on this. Working with nonprofits, for example, so this coming October, every year I run the London Half Marathon, and this year I've partnered up with Refuge, which provides shelter, mental health, all sorts of services to women and children who are survivors of domestic or sexual violence, and working with them to both raise funds, raise awareness, get people involved, provide support to this organization, and tying in my TED Talk with that. And all of these things, that it just gives you another kind of form of media to get your message across. And obviously, when I first had the idea to give the talk, I was still in private practice. But I think now, working at the ABA, it's something that, as the ABA continues, its efforts in victims' rights and, obviously speaking out against violence against women, that, it's just another thing that, they can even use as they develop policy and advocate on that behalf.
Thank you for taking my questions. I'm going to turn it over to Katrina, who's going to give some previously submitted questions as well as audience questions submitted today. Take it over, Katrina.
Well, thank you very much, Claire. I appreciate it. And so I do have to say, after watching your TED Talk, it was I was moved after watching your talk. It was unbelievable. So with saying that, what advice would you have for giving a TED Talk for young attorneys who think that this might be something that is in the future for them?
You know, I always tell young lawyers, anything that you can do outside of, you know, your day-to-day job is important, whether it's speaking at conferences, writing articles, all of those things. And so, you know, definitely, you know, obviously we all want to get to the big red circle on the stage. It's an exciting thing to do. And so, you know, if that's something that you want to do, you know, start finding ways, moderate panels that bar associations put on, speak at events, find things to get involved in, but most of all, just have something that you're passionate about. I think a lot of young lawyers, you know, we can all recall getting stuck necessarily working on things that weren't ideal or the most exciting things in the world, but we were developing our legal skills. And so I think if you have something that you're passionate about, that you care about, that you want to make part of your career, whether on the pro bono side or as your day-to-day practice, finding something like that and then finding a way to work that into your professional development, I think it's a great idea, and it's something that it's a long path, but it's something that, especially for young lawyers, it's a way for them to get involved and build their resumes and really become an active member of the profession.
So I know you had said previously that, you know, this was a long preparation process in getting from when you had decided, or they decided that you wanted to, that they were going to let you do this talk, and getting to, you know, actually giving it. How did you find the time to prepare, you know, not the remarks, and do, you know, rehearse this with your dog, and, you know, how did you, with everything else that you do, how did you find time to do that?
I mean, it was, you know, I'll never forget when I was in law school, there was a professor who joked that you would be thinking about cases as you brushed your teeth and showered in the morning, that you were billing that time. And so that was part of it. It was, you know, any free moment I had, whether I was driving in my car, whether I was walking around my house, and it was setting aside time, scheduling time each day to work on my talk, to do the research. Once I had it done, to do practice rounds. Even when I got to Monaco, you know, we were in press reviews the day before, we had practice rounds, but then it was every spare moment I had in my hotel room, I was rehearsing and rehearsing and rehearsing. So it is a huge time commitment. And so that's the one thing that I always tell everyone when they're thinking about this is understand that for 4 to 6 months, your life is going to revolve around this talk.
So in the topic that you talked on in violence against women and you know, all of that, what can we as young lawyers, how can we as young lawyers help the American Bar Association or other bar associations that are doing the similar work that the ABA is doing? How can we help on these issues?
I mean, there's a number of things. I think the biggest thing is advocacy. And, you know, we're not just talking about Congress. You know, we've had the Violence Against Women Act, but I think it really is at the local level and the personal level. And, you know, I even say it's at the individual level, where if you hear someone making comments that are harassing or insulting against women, or someone treating women inappropriately, that you speak up and you call the person out on it, you know, that you report it, that, you know, you really try to train both in your own life and the lives of others around you to just not tolerate this and to set an example. You know, from there, obviously the legislative advocacy, you know, equal pay for equal women, stronger penalties for, you know, those who commit sexual violence against women or domestic violence against women. You know, they shouldn't be getting a slap on the wrist. You know, there should be serious penalties for these things. But then I think also it really is creating, you know, at this point, while it is such a, you know, epidemic, basically, we really need to have more support for women. One of the biggest problems we have in this country is that, you know, we've developed wonderful resources for victims of human trafficking who are from other countries and have been brought into the United States. But then when we have women and girls who were, you know, either runaways because their homes were abusive or they were tricked into situations by a boyfriend or other person, we don't have the shelters for them. We don't have the resources to provide them the medical care, the drug treatment, the absolutely vital mental health treatment. And so that's where we really need to focus a lot of effort, is making sure that these organizations have the funding, they have the resources, they have the staffing, but also that members of the community participate. And, reach out and act as mentors to these women, give them a chance, find them jobs, provide whatever it is, but be an example for them, to help them get on their feet and have a support group, because many of them, they don't have families that they can turn to. Children, they may not be able to go back to the home that they came from. That may have been where the abuse was. Women may not have, it might have been their husband, and they may not have family members. And so we really need to provide those support resources. And I think that's something that anyone can do, whether lawyer or not, no matter how old you are, no matter what your resources are. Anyone can volunteer. Anyone can, come up with ideas for programs or pool resources. We saw that in response to, the immigration actions of this administration. There's no reason we can't do things like that for victims of domestic violence.
And what kind of things is your office in the American Bar Association? What kind of things are either policies or other projects that your office is working on? What kind of things are you guys doing to either in this area or other areas now?
So the ABA has an excellent history of developing policy on human trafficking, violence against women, victims' rights, and that's certainly something that we're continuing to do. Our governmental affairs office, just a few months ago, there was a stronger anti-human trafficking bill that also addressed violence against women, and we weighed in on that, very supportive of the senators and representatives who were sponsoring that bill. All of these things are things that, we try to be very active in, ensuring that, appropriate laws gets passed. Obviously, there's always the considerations of constitutionality, due process of law, protecting the rule of law. But it has been something that the ABA has done a number of programs on, trainings for lawyers to represent those who are working with victims. And it's actually something we had a discussion the other day about, how do we provide counsel for victims in certain circumstances? We have a task force working right now to update some policies that were done about 15 years ago relating to victims' rights and proceedings, and how do we provide them the resources they need. And so I think it's really something that the ABA has seen as important and will continue to see so in terms of our policies, our programming, and that's certainly something young lawyers should get involved with if this is something that's interesting for them.
That's absolutely right. And one final question from one of our viewers is, she wants to know what we as we as the world, or we as a community, can do better to help women in her home country of the DRC, the Congo, and other countries all over the world, to help kind of stop this, using women as weapons of war in those war-torn areas.
Do we have another hour for me to answer that? Obviously, the DRC is a devastating situation right now. And this is where, one, the awareness is key in getting people who know about what's going on. This is also where our country needs to step up, or any country needs to step up, to become a place where those who are fleeing violence, especially the type of sexual violence that's occurring in the DRC and elsewhere, can go to and be safe. The answer is not to leave people in refugee camps for 2 or 3 years at a time. These are tense, they're horrible conditions. And as we found with the refugee camps of Syrians, the number of sexual assaults that then occur in these camps. So you have these people who've already been tortured, victimized, forced to flee a country that they never would have wanted to leave, and then they get put in a safe place and they get re-victimized. And so that's really something that I think it's really calling on the international community to step up. But then also, we need to work within these countries. We need to provide the resources. We need to provide education. That's number one, whether we're talking about the United States or elsewhere. We have to fund education. We have to give people the means and resources to live. We have to give people the basic things to survive. Many countries around the world, basic living conditions like clean water and sanitation facilities are not available. And I think the rest of the world needs to step up and say, we have so much, we should at least be giving people the basic quality of life. Because when people do have education, when they do have knowledge, I don't want to use the word power, but when they're not fighting just to survive in everyday life, they're in a better position to not allow the corruption and violence and other things that usually lead to violence against women to pervade society.
Thank you, and thank you. That's all the questions that we have. Thank you so much again for being here with us, and I will turn it back over to Claire.
Thank you, Katrina. Thank you for serving as the Young Lawyers Division representative for this talk. Thank you, Sara Elizabeth Dill, for your wonderful, not only for your wonderful talk today, but for the TEDx talk from December. You're not leaving us, though, because we have another talk, a webinar in 2 weeks, who will, Paula Edgar will also join us, and that will be on June 22nd at 12:30 Eastern. It's entitled The Side Hustle, Making Social Media Work Outside of Work. And it will continue this lovely conversation that we've had today. So thank you to the audience. I hope you learned a little more about the process for TED Talks, but also the topic of women as weapons of war. Both topics are interesting and important to have at the ABA. And thank you to our sponsors, the Section of Civil Rights and Social Justice, the Criminal Justice Section, and the Young Lawyers Division. Thank you and have a good day.
Thank you.